for it, yeah. Certainly, Coach, yeah. Okay, so I want to start with the man who saved the world. Has anyone ever seen the film, The Man Who Saved the World? Okay, so The Man Who Saved the World. It's a really interesting sort of documentary I watched a while ago. It stars Kevin Costner, who you probably know, and Stanislav Petrov. It probably won't mean a great deal to a lot of people, that name. The director, I think, was Peter Anthony, and the writer was Peter Anthony. And I'm sort of going to shortly talk about this sort of film. Stanislav Petrov, and I apologise if I've not pronounced the name correctly, my Russian isn't great. But on the evening of the 29th of September 1983, Colonel Petrov took over the command of the warning system as the officer on duty for a nuclear attack for Russia. So you can imagine this guy, he's working, he's looking at the radar for a nuclear attack that could happen on Russia. Now, he's sort of sitting there and he gets a signal that on his sort of satellite, and if you do get a chance to watch the documentary, it's going to explain a lot better than what I could ever dream of doing. There's a message saying that there's a ballistic rocket coming in from America, okay? And he checks all these sort of systems, and it's confirmed that the rocket's being launched from the States. Now, they have a protocol in place that if obviously the rocket's launched to them, they're going to launch one back, one would think. But all the things he did, all the checks he does at that point, confirm in the first few minutes, rocket's been fired. So he holds back, because he says in the documentary something along the lines that if he had have alerted his authorities, then what could have happened is that it could have instigated a fire back, and that's disaster, isn't it? We don't want that. So he couldn't find any faults in the system at this point in time. There was no faults, and he's got this sort of warning signal that the rocket's heading towards Russia, so to speak. No faults in the system. And to make matters worse, all of a sudden you've got a third rocket, a second rocket, a third, a fourth, and I think a fifth rocket in the space of 5 minutes. And everything is pointing towards a rocket attack. So you've got one rocket warning, then there's 2, 3, 4, and 5. And goodness me, you just imagine being in that situation where you're responsible for initiating a retaliation. Now, time's going by, and he doesn't make the brief. He holds back. If he makes the brief, I think he says in the film it could lead to a retaliation, a counter-strike. So he decides that, okay, at this point, we'll sort of conclude as a false alarm. Now you've got 10, 15 minutes at this point to see the result of the decision. And in 10, you probably won't see the result of the decision because obviously, exactly, if he's made the right choice. And he decides, I'm going to count it as a false alarm at this point. Now, all the checks at this point, I think there were 28 to 9, say it's a rocket being launched. And it's a great documentary. It's obviously a true story. Eventually, the other detectives confirm it's a false alarm. Okay? And they said, and I stand corrected, if anyone's seen the documentary, do email me or get in touch or leave a message. There was a rare alignment of sunlight that reflected from the fire from the Earth into the satellite lens. So there's some sort of thing that had happened there that had caused the issue. Now, the apocalypse that would have happened had he sort of retaliated. And I think he passed away a couple of years ago, but I think the guy should have, if anyone should get another Peace Prize, goodness me, to hold back. So The Man Who Saved the World, you get a chance to watch it. It's a great documentary or docu-film type thing. It really is powerful. And I think from what I understand, he was kind of, not undermined, but the Russian authorities kind of downplayed the significance of what he did, because obviously the faulty system, so to speak. But Stanislav Petrov there avoided in 1983 an absolute potential disaster. Now, is that emotional intelligence, do you think, or is that just, what do you do in that situation? Is that what you call? Could you class that as emotional intelligence? Someone sort of sits back and, I mean, how much resolve would you need? You know, I think for me sometimes, you know, it's hard to hold back on the road when you're driving. Someone cuts you up, you want to retaliate. If you've got teenagers and they sort of look at you a certain way, you know, goodness me. So it's hard enough doing that. But you think a guy here is faced with the world. And I think, who would say that's emotional intelligence? Who would say, could you define it as that?
I think it's a strong sense of personal belief.
Yeah.
I would say. So it's all, if you look at logical levels, strong sense of identity and belief.
Well, it must be,
and capability.
Absolutely.
Trust in your own.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely,
Trust in yourself.
For sure. Because there's a point when, you know, there's got to be a point when you think, well, you can't take any action anyway. So there's many things that are going on. It really is a fascinating documentary, and I mention that because it sort of shows we've got to make these big decisions, big calls. And I don't know if you're aware of if you come across the Walter Mischel Marshmallow experiments. I don't know if you've come across that before. It's in the 60s at Stanford, and what he does is he sort of very loosely, he's got these 5-year-olds, and he says to the 5-year-olds, you can have one marshmallow now, or I'm going to leave the room and come back and you can have 2. Okay, or something along those lines anyway. I can send you the research paper if you want to. You can find it on Google, no doubt. And the idea was around impulse control. So some 5-year-olds had said, you know what, we'll wait for you to come back and get 2 or 3 marshmallows. Some have just gone for it, just, you know, scoffed it there and then. That's what I would do, my impulse control, when marshmallows are concerned anyway. But the point being is that, fascinatingly enough, what they didn't document in a lot of the studies is that they followed those children up. And they found that the children who held back had achieved better in school and in their life in general in the years following. The only thing I would say for me, impulse control, it's useful to a point, but what about when you need the impulse? So I'm going to sort of raise a hypothesis that there are times that you just need to act. So here's me sort of, you know, throwing the cat amongst the pigeons, so to speak, to say, okay, there might be a case in point. So is it really a bad thing to be impulsive all the time? Well, maybe not. Well, certainly if you want 2 marshmallows, it's a bad thing to be impulsive. But what if he doesn't come back? You know, what if he doesn't come back? What if he, you know, so if he doesn't come back, you haven't taken the 1 marshmallow, so there's no guarantee of that happening. So you've got to make these sort of judgments. So I don't think it's always a bad thing to have some sort of impulse, but it could be a bad thing if you sort of do a rash challenge in a football, if you sort of business-wise, if someone sends you a text or an email, you sort of retaliate in a certain way, that could be a bad thing. So there are a lot of places where impulse aren't good. If someone spills a drink on you in a bar and you sort of decide, no, I'm going to hit this guy or whatever, not a good idea, because the consequences are not good for anybody involved. So there's the case for impulse being good. But the point being is that it's quite fascinating that how impulse has a big impact. And I suppose the correlation is between the part of the brain, the frontal cortex, the logical part of the brain, the processing power that we have, and the more primal brain, the limbic system. And the two sort of tennis match that goes on. Because people say, you know, I've heard this before many a time, it's not what people do, it's how you interpret what they do. Someone could say something to you, it's your choice to respond the way you want to. But the reality is, if you really wanted to, you could fire something into someone's limbic system and cause a retaliation. It's irrespective of how strong you are mentally. We've seen the most strongest people mentally get riled up. Very much so. So really, maybe you could buy time. Maybe before you answer a question, you could sort of do what some people do, and some people I've trained to do, who work in the public eye, the media, football managers, politicians. I always say, before you answer a question, have a drink, not vodka, water, or even just buy time, because you've got that 6-second opportunity to go from the limbic to the neocortex. It's a more logical response. And sometimes I don't respond to someone immediately because I know the response is going to be an emotional response. They design, we go to conflict management by the way, they've designed the communication to rile you up. they've got you where you want, or they want you to be, and then you respond, there's only one winner. If you sort of hold back and someone calls you something or says something that sort of winds you up, they know what can rile you up. If you hold back and a more logical response, it's the whole dynamic changes. And it's always a good thing to do, I think. In football, I used to say, you know what, after the game, let's leave the meeting. Let's not make any decisions after the game, win, lose or draw. Let's come in the following day and make decisions then. It's really easy. You win a game and whatever. You lose a game and the ball's then. A logical decision, because you've got that part of the brain that makes us human. The logical brain. We don't always use it very well. And when I talk about evolution of the brain, I talked about in the first module and the seminar I did last night, it's really significant because you've got a more primal structure of the brain, the emotional sense of the brain, and I think it's really important to be able to push things to the more logical brain. And how do we know that part of the brain, the logical brain, the frontal cortex, does what it does? Because of neuroimaging, because of things that have happened in the past. You ever heard of Phineas Gage? Okay, so he blows a rod through his brain in an accident at work. This happened 60, 70 years ago, and he damages his frontal part of the brain. And in doing that, he was still capable of doing a number of things. However, he was far more impulsive. He was far more agitated. People said that he wasn't the same person he was before. So, someone suffers trauma, an impact or injury, it can change the whole persona. So that's how we sort of know that part of the brain. But more to the point, so what exactly is this EI that people go on about? What is it? And I want you to think about that. We're going to sort of challenge you a bit here to think, okay, what exactly is it? How do you measure it? They're big things. Defining emotional intelligence is a challenge in many ways. Because how do you measure? It's like someone told me yesterday during a seminar, she said that she's doing a PhD on hope and how that correlates to people getting better. And I said, well, how are you going to measure hope? It's quite an interesting scale. How do you actually measure EI? How do you quantify it? Well, according to Peter Salovey and John Mayer, the first two psychologists, they termed it in the 90 article. And they said it was to promote emotional intellectual growth. They coined the term EI. Okay? And it's significant because their model is focused on the ability for someone to process emotional information and navigate the social environment. So if I go to the bar, someone spills a drink on me, okay, I know striking that person is not a good idea. It has severe consequences and ramifications. However, there are many people, you could argue, who perhaps aren't incarcerated, who would strike someone. Now, I'm not saying I'm any more intelligent than what they are, or any of us in the room are, but there is a fine line between the two, isn't it? To make a decision. That rational decision. If someone cuts you up in the motorway, what do? Do you get into a slanging match with that person? Or you just decide, you know what, they might be taking their wife to hospital who's giving birth. Many things could be. It might be, not personalising it. Because if a big gush of wind blew the car a little bit, you wouldn't start arguing the wind, would you? Kind of let things be. But the point being is to navigate the social environment, adaptive behaviour. So you might get a sports person who starts telling the referee off for the bad decision, but they wouldn't do it in general life. But in that social environment, in the football field, in the cauldron of 80,000 people, there might be little fans shouting at the referee. Now those fans shouting at the referee, would they go the following day and start shouting at their boss in the same way? Or their staff? Probably not. But in that environment, they call the referee all sorts. Who'd want to be a referee? But they wouldn't do that, and they wouldn't want to be called what they call as well. But the article is there, that's what sort of coins it, and that's where it sort of begins. I'll send you the presentation if you want that, you've got the stream as well. So they start to sort of see a correlation between emotional intelligence and test at work. Okay, so then you start seeing that they've devised these tests and they correlate to performance at work. The people who score highly on these tests perform better at work scientifically. It's been researched, okay? And one of the articles that does that is the one by Pecker, van der Linden, Bakker and Bourne, 2017. It's a great article that sort of shows this sort of correlation. Now, many years ago when I first started one of my first corporate jobs, I was asked to go in there and I had limited corporate experience back in the day, and it's a long time ago now. But anyway, cutting a long story short, they said to me, I said, what do you want to improve? And they gave me this sort of list of targets. And I said, well, what are these? And the guy says to me, the manager of the firm, he says, they're called KPIs. Have you heard of KPIs before? I'd never heard of them before. I said, I go, no. But I didn't tell him that because I would look like, as you do. So I said, yeah, I'll have a read tonight, as one does. Thinking, let me have a read and see what I can come up with. But I took them home and I'm reading away and thinking, okay, I've made a psychological link to these key performance indicators, not what they are now. Well, at least I think I know. And I thought, these are all external attribution. They're uncontrollable factors. You can influence them, but you cannot control them. They're what we call in psychology external attribution. So in a football game, you can't control the referee, you can't control the weather, you can't control the crowd, but you can control your own state to a point. So the KPI for me was external. So you couldn't control whether someone buys. You couldn't control how someone spoke to you on the phone. You couldn't control a lot of things that go on, the market. But what you could control, and I went back to internal attribution, control yourself. You can be enthusiastic, you can be passionate, you can be all the things that make a good member of staff. And I developed a scale. And the scale I developed was based on some theories. I didn't just pluck it out of the sky. How we could scale it. And I thought, if you get staff who are enthusiastic, who are motivated, who are grateful for their customers, if they can hit an 8 out of 10 being high in those areas, if the product is a market, it's going to look after itself. And that was where I sort of focused my attention, the HPI, a human performance indicator. You won't find it in Google, it's my own creation, and someone's taken it now. But the point being is that I want to build a member of staff who had all those sort of credentials that they could control. Because you can do something good and bad, the same amount of energy. You can turn up to work and put all your problems behind and focus. Or you can turn up to work and be like a rudderless ship type thing, and sail off. And that was the key. So what was I doing by doing that? Well, it correlated to emotional intelligence, but it also correlated to other models too, which I'll talk about as we go along. Because it's difficult to separate, well, it's not difficult to separate, but there is a mesh between IQ, EQ, personality traits. Okay, so IQ, EQ, personality traits. There is sort of a mesh in one sense, okay, which we'll talk about as we go along. You've heard of IQ, obviously you're aware of that, IQ, personality traits, I'll sort of touch on that as well. So there is a mesh there, but different researchers, what we know now, describe it in different ways. Goldman, anyone come across Goldman before? A lot of his work's been published. So he sort of talks about in his article in 2000 as awareness and perception of others, in short. So self-awareness. Am I aware of my own emotions? Am I aware of others' emotions? Their perception? Having a good sense of self. Do I know my triggers? Do I know what sets me off? Self-awareness is key. Maybe I plan my day differently. Maybe I plan my day when I'm in a different state of mind, or can influence my state more to do certain tasks, prioritization. Okay, so the article is there. I'll send you that as well. So Martinez and Alder talk about as non-cognitive skills and an ability to deal with external pressure. So they don't see it as the IQ in the sense that your cognition. It's the way you deal with the external environment, incoming information. We all react differently. So the external pressure could be you got a deadline. We go back to the KPI. If you don't sell so many such and such, then this happens. We need to close. we have to hit these targets. The external pressure coming, how do we handle that? Because two people can both break up in a relationship, and one can handle it different than the other. And bereavement, one handles it differently. Right. Maybe genes are involved as well. Another story for another day, but that's their sort of way of thinking as well. The Mayer article and Salavoy talk about the perception of knowing your own emotions, and who knows their own emotions? How do we know? Emotional influence on completing a task as well. So what do? You've got a task. How many people can sort of task prioritize in the group where you're given a task to do, but you find everything else but anything else to do rather than do that task? To focus on what you've got to do, the task in hand. Okay, so, something's going on in your life, and you go to work, and you can't seem to focus. You wouldn't want a surgeon who's had an argument with his wife or her husband coming in to operate on you if they were still hung up about the evening before. You'd want to block that out. You wouldn't want a pilot, or you wouldn't want anybody in certain circumstances who had a task to do that got detracted from what was going on somewhere else. And life being the way it is, we've always got challenges. So that's why generally people who've got quote unquote high EI tend to do the sort of jobs that require, well, the work that they do generally is very influential across the board kind of thing. So what is it? How do we define it? It's a big important factor. How do you measure it? How do you measure the damn thing? And there are limitations of measuring it. Is it a unique way of measuring it? Other variables that you've got to take in consideration. And what are we measuring? And they're things you want to ask yourself around the limitations of measuring it. And when we talk about self-reporting as well, if you get a test to do, you don't have to be really, you don't have to be Einstein to work out what the people probably want to know. So self-reporting can be a limitation too. I know if you give me a test, will I really handle it that way? So what would you do for irate customer phones? Would you tell them off? Would you ask them politely what they want? Well, you know the answer to that. But the reality is the next day you go to work and irate customer phones up and you tell them where to go. So behaviour is a better indicator than self-reporting. So you can tell people what they want to hear. It's like when you're new in a relationship, you just tell the person what they want to damn hear. And 5 years later, they see the real news coming out now. Can you put the bins out, please? Sod off, you put them out. So, your EI is diminishing then. But the point being is that, there's other correlations at play, but self-reporting is easy. So there's a danger of self-reporting. So we're going to look at the other side of it, which we've got to do in the course. And Schultz suggested that it's not unique as a concept. And it probably isn't. What he suggested was that other variables like the 5-factor model, cognitive intelligence, and gender contributed a significant amount in the variance of scoring in EI, which suggests limitations of EI scoring. So it's really important. You're going to go out there as corporate people and get these sort of tests and download them and pay big bucks for them. Do take that in consideration. It's really important you do that. The 5-factor model. I'll sort of touch on that briefly. I sort of go into more detail in another course. I've got a video on it I can email you. But I'm going to touch on it very briefly shortly, the 5-factor model. I'm going to go through it very briefly because there is a correlation there. So, is EI a construct of that model? Which a lot of people are going to say. If you want also, I've written a manual. I can email it to you at no cost because you're on the course. And it goes into more detail on that model. And there's a little test there as well. And I'll give you an idea, because we'll go into it very briefly. But the point being, they're saying it could be a facet of that, a facet of personality. Are they reliable self-reporting? I don't think they are very reliable, but they are useful. They are useful, but not 100% reliable, because anyone can pretty much interpret anything and sort of tell you what they want to hear. That's a danger. And a danger is in self-reporting, by the way, with anything, is that you make this misconception of the person. You sort of decide, you know what, you give someone a test, an assessment, they do it, and they sort of know what to put down. And you miss out on the good person for the job because you actually interpret it in a way that you could have got someone who's more suitable for the job, but you got hung up about this score, this profile you've been sold. You've paid thousands of dollars or pounds for this profile, and all of a sudden it's more of a deterrent. It's damn useless because it's telling you nothing, okay? And you make a wild assumption. So, you know, there are other ways of doing that. So, Conte talked about the validity of self-reporting and said exactly what I'm saying now in that respect. Reliable validity, big problem, okay? And he said that someone could think their way through an answer. It wouldn't be difficult to think your way through an answer. So do better and Mark. There's the article there. So there's a correlation of personality traits. And if so, the relationship influence behaviour in the workplace, education, schools. So personality traits we talked about there. So you try to separate the mesh of personality traits, of key aspects of EI. Is a challenge. There's a close relationship between the big five and EI. While certain researchers can be dismissive, some people I talk to in the field of psychology dismiss EI. They think, no, it's basically a spin-off the big five.
What is the big five?
I'm going to touch on it very briefly. I've got a video that I did on that as well, and I can send you a manual in more detail because the time we've got, we can't cover the whole concept, but I'm going to touch on it very briefly shortly. But according to the research, it suggests that both biological and environment play a role in shaping personality. Companies use the big five personality test. They're basically 5 key personality traits that have 30 sub-traits. All human beings possess these 5 personality traits. However, some people have a higher preference in other areas than others. So the traits, I'll do it shortly. I've got a small variation of a test you can do. We can do that at some point today. But the key aspect of the big five, and I don't want to sort of focus too much on it because this component is about EI, but I think that's really important to understand the correlation, and I'm more than happy to send you information in this area. But the big five is accepted and most commonly used in personality in academic psychology. The big five comes from a statistical study of responses to personality items using a technique called the factor analysis. So it's a scientific model, okay, that's used in psychology, and it says it can be used across culture. There's no differentiation across culture, albeit there has been evidence to just the contrary, but it's pretty solid and robust. There's been many samples around the world, the big five. Whilst there seem to be unlimited personality variables, 5 stand out, explaining a lot about people's personality. Okay, the big five are not associated with a particular test. A variety of measures have been developed to measure them. Okay, but the 2 main ones are the NEO. They're the 2 main ones to measure, and you can Google them if you want to. Are the NEO or the personality item pool. So NEO, it's been revised. Personality, inventory, revised, or the IPIP. They're the 2 main ones, but you'll see a lot of other ones too. The 5-factor model was developed by McRae and Costa. Okay, and it's commonly measured, as I mentioned, by the NEO. The NEO personal inventory. It examines the big five, and it also reports on the 6 subcategories called facets. So you've got the big five and subcategories. Okay, the revision began in '78, and it's been revised in '85, '90, 2005. Hence NEO, PI 1, 2, 3 for revisions. Okay. Now, you've also got the IPIP developed by Goldberg in '92. And Goldberg you can access that for free on the internet. And if you go and type in IPIP, it's developed by Goldberg, 92. You can sort of develop and start looking at your own inventories. And obviously I mentioned the 5-factor model also measured by the NEO, which is McRae and Costa. The difference being is that you're going to pay for that, whereas here you can access the resource, okay, on the internet.
Don't you think that you change as you get older? As
Great
you
point.
learn and what kind of job?
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
I've been doing them. I've done one of them, I think, 10 years.
The-
for about the last.
The big 5? Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Yes.
I think it's the same as like personality profile analysis.
No, it would probably be different. I mean, you have many profile assessments. The difference being this is an academic model. It's based on scientific research. It's very heavily scientific. It's the most scientific model around personality traits, the big 5. And the reason I mention it is because we're covering EI and there's a correlation there. And no, DISC is completely different. Completely different. So this, and the Lewis Goldberg, by the way, psychologist Lewis Goldberg, he developed the IPIP. It's an inventory that has descriptive statements around each trait within each factor. So if you go on the internet, you'll get more detail. But equally, you can email me. I'll send you a video and some resources to get more detail, so we don't get bogged down on the big 5. And it's related to more specific aspects of personality. So you've got that there, the big 5 markers. On the research, they're fixed. So the research suggests, not me saying it, the research literature suggests that they're fixed. They've got a biological base. If someone's neurotic at 15, they're going to be neurotic at 50 more than likely, irrespective of what IQ is. Okay? So you can see that as limitation, or you can see that as reality. You can see it as work best you've got of finding employment. But neurotic, by the way, is a trait that is linked, it has a correlation to pathology. These aren't pathological traits, by the way, but neuroticism does have a correlation with anxiety. So, you know, you take it or you will. So the model has 5 traits. The traits are openness, conscientiousness, extraversion, agreeable, and neuroticism. So the reality is really, people who generally do well in society, as a general rule, if you want to define one society, generally are conscientiousness, high in conscientiousness, score high, and in agreeableness, as a general rule. You know, and as a general rule, by the way, according to the research, women tend to be more higher in agreeableness than men. As a general rule, the research says that. Okay, but I think from working from a corporation point of view, conscientiousness is a good one to score high on, which speaks for itself, and I can send you more details on that as we go on. But in saying that, there's no reason why if you're highly neurotic, if you're conscientious, you can't channel that energy into a task. So how you manage people, okay, is quite useful. Openness, creativity, extraversion. But there is a danger, by the way, and a limitation in this model too. Because what would you say a presenter is? Would you say a presenter is an extrovert or an introvert? How would you see a presenter? You see him as an extrovert? Possibly.
But not necessarily.
But great point. Because I know plenty of lecturers who are great lecturers, but they're introverted. They're much happier in the research lab than being out there presenting, but they present really, really well. So someone scores low in extraversion, you don't hire them as a trainer because you think, well, they're not going to be appropriate. Then you hire the introvert, and you hire the wrong person. It's sort of wealth of knowledge you don't take on board because you know how to do well. So there is a danger in that too. But like I said, I'll send you more details. I did a more extensive video on it, and I do a more extensive video on it on the first coaching course that we do, which I can send through to you and I send some research. But there's 6 facets. It's the most scientifically personality test trait model, and it's really important to mention it in this part of the module because it's really significant. Because obviously, when you're talking about EI, it's really important to know the correlation. And they're the big 5, we mentioned that before. You've got the 6 facets. When you So you've got the big five, and they've got 6 facets as well. Each of the big five has 6 facets. The Neo has different facets to the IPIP. So I'll give you an example. Conscientiousness, you'll see the Neo, competence, order, dutifulness, achievement, self-discipline, deliberation, is different to the IPIP. Some of them are different labels. So bear that in mind. The 2 main ways of measuring the big five are the Neo and the IPIP. There's many other people who put measuring ways, but you'll see the facets are different. Some of them are anyway. Okay? Some of them are different. And you sort of see, and I don't know, we won't go into too much details of time, but you can sort of see. One thing I want to say, you see anxiety here and neuroticism, emotional stability. That's not anxiety as in anxiety pathological. It's sort of a different sort of anxiety. Anxiety in the sense of personality trait. But there is a correlation between neuroticism and anxiety pathologically too, which is interesting too. But they're the sort of 6 facets. I sort of put the facets down, not to go into in each detail, because we don't have time for that. It's not the remit of the course, but do be aware that the IPIP and the Neo, the facets can be slightly different, as you can see. So I sort of threw that in there as you go along. So research, they don't always agree the exact label for each dimension. Okay, that research won't always agree, but it's really useful to predict relationship between success in social, academic, and professional circumstances. So it's a useful model for that. And during the 80s and 90s, a vast array of research combined to support the 5 fundamental, but not everyone agrees on the name of the traits. Okay, they're not associated with a particular test or assessment, and they're useful to predict behaviour or relation between traits, and we mentioned earlier about people success in academia. So someone who's conscientious will probably do better in academia, who scores highly in conscientiousness and agreeableness. Someone who's probably going to hold down a job. Okay, someone who's not highly neurotic probably might not hold down. So it's a data-driven model, not based on psychological theories, done by factor analysis. But I mentioned earlier about how it could have a limitation too. So, bringing it back to EI again, after we sort of touched on that, we talked about the article by Sullivan and Mayer. They focus on the expression of emotional regulation and the adaptation of utilization on a task or problem. So there's a link there to neuroticism really, and that can be the debate between some people saying EI is a spin-off that model to a point, but equally the research by Zadal examined the correlation between EI and the traits using Goldman's inventory, because Goldman, as you're aware of his work, did the inventory, and they showed a correlation between emotional intelligence and the big 5 extraversion. The correlation between the two. Okay, hence the debate between, is it just a spin-off the big 5? Well, that depends on your opinion and what research you tend to favour. But the key thing we do know, how important it is, going back to supporting EI. There's a lot of research out there. E.B. Adam and Russell Gaby showed how people who achieve high in EI would go on to do really well in adapting to an environment. How well do you adapt in your environment is key. Things change in obtaining goals. Things that outside your control change. The research by Carmelli as well shows our senior managers with high levels of emotional intelligence develop more positive state internal attribution. Go back to that, the HPI. See, senior managers who are more in control of their own internal attribution tend to work better. They can manage their own emotions. They do better. So there is research out there to show that. So what can I control? What can't I control? What am I aware of? Am I empathic to my staff? I have a member of staff who comes to see me and says, I want to go watch my 7-year-old in the play. What do I say to that person? No, you don't go, you've got to finish at 5. What would you say to that person? No, you stay back. Well, do you not think by letting them go, they'll probably repay your attention? Being empathic is a better idea. If they're doing it every day, then it's a damn problem. But equally, you know, how we deal with high levels of EI and segregate work and home life is key too. Can I break away from what goes on at home into the work environment and vice versa? In a sales environment, external factors we talked about earlier, we can't control many things. It's not possible to control certain things. You can influence them. You can't control them. So you need the KPI to measure performance, but the ability to influence the outcome will derive from staff capability to manage your own states. So as a sports person, you get an opportunity to score a goal, to do something sporting-wise. If you're not in the right state, no matter how your skill level is, you won't get there. So have the best product in the world, but if you're not, you'll be the best therapist in the world, have the most knowledge in the world. If you're not in the right states at the right time, you won't do very well. It's, you know, if you go to lunch and someone cuts you up on the road, and you come and sit down at 1:30, and you're still stewing over someone cutting you up, you won't take anything on board. You've got to let it go, move on, and that's a case for EI. If you take everything personal, okay, if I'm walking down the street, someone mentions, you know, something about my shoes or whatever, really, if I want to take everything on board and personal, then I'm not really in a good place, am I? If I walk down the street and my best friend walks past me and ignores me, what do? Do I pick up the phone and say, "You damn sod, why'd you ignore me"? Is that what I do? If they're making redundancies and the boss walks straight past me, I'll say, "Oh, I'm going to get the sack now. I'm going to get redundant now." Or do I think, well, actually, my friend I saw, he might be preoccupied. I send a text, "Are you okay?" He might have ignored me. I can't control that, but there's a good chance he might not have seen me, or the boss might be preoccupied. So how I respond, that gap between impulse and response, Dr. Viktor Frankl, the gap between impulse and response is key. You've got a choice to hold fire, and that's a key element of EI. And it's a lot of research in the literature suggests that has a big role. So people in the corporate environment, you've got loads of literature out there you can present, okay? Well, there is literature out there that says that it's you know, what I would say to conclude on a few final points before we break for lunch and we come back and do some work, again, some more practical stuff. Based on research, I would say EI plays a bigger role in some jobs and lesser in others, in my opinion. Based on research, I think that, okay, perhaps in a sales environment, perhaps as a surgeon, pilot, certain professions might require a higher level of EI than others. Possibly. A good chance. They might not do. I'm making that hypothesis based on the intricacy and what's at stake, okay, in certain situations. Not saying one thing's more important than the other, but, okay, if you decide not to come back to the Marshmallows, you might upset a few 5-year-olds, but if you're doing a brain surgery on someone, it's probably more intricate protocol and procedure. But the point being is that, okay, some jobs require more EI than others, and then we've got to design an intricate test. And the challenge is, can you sort of look at the self-reporting? Can you start looking at things that you can do to sort of be more self-aware for self as well? Other variables, I think, are important. According to the literature, I think that there's many other variables that interact with that. So let's not just focus on EI. I think general intelligence, IQ, has a correlation. Some people don't. I think, according to the evidence, that IQ does. But that's just my theory based on the evidence. I think personality traits do, beliefs and schemas do, cognitive intelligence do. I think the big five that we sort of covered very briefly, and I can send you more information on, do as well. Technical skills do as well. No point sending me to do brain surgery. I'm not a brain surgeon. I'm going to mess up. No point telling me to fly a plane. We don't want to be on the damn plane. But tell me to go and do a lecture on what I specialise in, fine. So technical skills, cognitive ability, how fast we process information for sure. So I think for me, knowing and how to quantify that is hard. That's a challenge. But all we can do is the best we can do, and all we can do is all we can do in any given situation to get an idea of people. So, we talked about the correlation, and there's been plenty of research, Matchman, correlation between personality dimensions and emotional intelligence amongst employees. So they found that what we mentioned earlier didn't have a big correlation. So it really is worth reading more about that as well. But before we sort of conclude, Zadal to a 4 examined the correlation between EI and the personality traits using the Goldman inventory that you've probably come across without realizing, and demonstrated, we mentioned earlier, correlation between EI and extraversion, the big 5, which consists of other research. Extraversion appears to be predominantly linked to EI, which makes sense because the criteria for business success would have a degree of extraversion. In sales, in certain business elements, you probably want to have someone who has got extraversion capacities. If you're going to be a front man or woman or person of a band, you probably want to be an extrovert to a point. You're going to stand up on stage. It would make a lot of sense to do. It wouldn't take a rocket scientist to think, okay, Freddie Mercury would have been an extrovert, so to speak, one would think. But equally in saying that, you might think, well, actually maybe John Lennon might be more of an introvert. Who knows? But I'm assuming based on what I see on TV. But the point being is that, okay, behaviour tells a lot about people too, but it's also dangerous to assume. But there are ways of measuring these things, and I mentioned earlier about the Big 5. There are ways of measuring that. It's worth looking at that, but there's plenty of inventories around EI as well. And I'm not going to sort of favour one more than the other, although there's plenty of them out there. You just do your own research. But they are very useful and have a big impact on areas. But I'm certainly not going to be in a situation where, I'm going to say there's a panaceic model and you just do this and walk away. It takes work. Because there are limitations. And there are plenty of people plenty of researchers will say that there isn't a correlation. There is no correlation with individual performance at school at work. Like Joseph Newman 210, they say that there isn't. So the purpose of doing that is to sort of show you both sides of the spectrum and all things said in one. I think it's important to get you thinking outside the box and not just sort of think, okay, here's the information and that's it. You've got to really think, and you've got to take all the things that we've covered in consideration, in your own considerations, like, how you separate the mesh, read the literature, the limitations as well, and final thoughts. And as I mentioned earlier before, that on a final note, before we break away for lunch, it's about thinking as a coach, as a therapist. It's about, now, not everyone quotes the literature, but I do. It's really important to me. I think it's really important to sort of look at the literature, see, and look at research too. I think anything that we come across, we need to examine very carefully before using it and making a big decision to use it. And the reason I think we should do that is because what might work for one person might not work for somebody else. But having an idea around that and giving an insight into EI is quite powerful, but also it initiates you to go away and look at the other areas that are instrumental, and maybe not become an expert in the Big 5, but okay, what are some of the correlations with that? And if you work in a corporate environment and you're going to sort of roll out EI stuff, think, okay, what are the limitations of self-reporting? What are limitations of developing a program? What else can I do as well as what I'm doing to get the best out of my staff? In adverse to going in there, buying a program that tells you it's one size fits all, I think I'll just roll that out. And, if anyone wants to debate me, I'm more than happy to debate on the sense that most businesses go out of business within the first few years. I think it's 50% the first year, 90% in 5, and after that you've got many businesses fail to evolve and go under. We know that people are treatment resistant to various things too, so it's very easy to debate. So okay, there's not one size fits all. So you've got that. You can watch that. I've sort of thrown that out there. I've hit you with a lot of information, a lot of food for thought, so to speak. But that's the whole idea of the course, to get people to think outside the box and consider all things as well. So on that note, we'll open for questions after the break. So I'm mindful of eating into your lunch, by the way. If we come back at 1:35, is that okay? Giving you a really good hour to take it all in and just separate your mind and clear your head. So, okay, thank you. Yeah.